Do you think this at all changes the Florida State debate, though? Do you think, because kind of looking at it, you think to yourself, maybe they did get the matchmakers got this right. Do you think Florida State's argument is, I don't see as many people talking about it, just because of the games, the way they played out yesterday. That, has been the majority of the conversation. And then some people are changing their thoughts on the Florida State situation a little bit.
Well, my argument for Florida State never had anything to do with who the four best teams were. It had more to do with them earning the spot because of the undefeated record and the conference championship.
Yep.
So that was my argument. It wasn't that Florida State was better than the other four teams, because I did not believe that they were at the time, and I still don't. We didn't get a chance to see Florida State really play against Georgia. We saw what was just a complete embarrassment of a football game. Florida State didn't have its two top quarterbacks, two or three top running backs, three best wide receivers, was completely gutted on defense, just really showed up with no one. And so what do you do with that score?
Yeah. I think the one thing about it, though, is it's, 60, what was it, 65-3?
Yeah, 63-3.
I see missing players is understandable. Georgia was missing 6. Brock Bowers was out. I get it. That's no.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a difference. About big of a deal compared to 29. But it's just the disparity of the scoring was so much, and the whole problem. Not only that, the lead up in the 2 games before that, where the quarterback had an opportunity to show out, and I think in one of the games they had 52 passing yards, or the quarterback had 52 passing yards. So it was their lead up right there was to handle business and show that they could do something. But then we're talking about the 29 players, and I know that makes an impact, but however, we weren't even shown that this offense with those guys can be successful. And especially, with the score being what it was, I don't know. I just feel like that wiped any potential question in the mind of that. And not only just that game, but just when those games played out yesterday and how they played out. I think like multiple things are factoring into the fact that, like, yeah, we got that was a great, yesterday was great for college football fans. That was one of the best days I can remember as far as how good the games were. And I'm wondering if just part of that has kind of wiped that slate clean a little bit, and people are just kind of being like, okay, maybe they did get it right. Because I'm noticing that a little bit, but wasn't sure if you still, and even to your point where it's like, they weren't one of the 4 best teams, but they earned it. And that's kind of where the committee chairman, I can't remember his exact title, was kind of like, we're not going, it's versus earned. We're trying to get the 4 best teams that fit, as far as, like, you can't put a 3-loss team that you think is the best, of course, but just in that general area, they're trying to get the 4 best teams and not the 4 that earned it, is what he basically essentially said.
So I don't have an issue with the selection that they made. I have an issue with that they have not stuck with that same approach before. And if they would have, then Cincinnati would not have been chosen for the playoff, and TCU would not have been chosen for the playoff. They were not among the 4 best teams in the country in those 2 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I have an issue with. This is the same committee, and I know that members of the committee have come and gone, but it's the same committee in regards to the criteria has not changed since day one. And so anyone who is added to that committee should be taking on the same criteria. So that's my number 1 issue, is this has not been their approach in the past. And number 2 is that they did not respond to Florida State's offensive issues prior to the ACC championship game, meaning that, for one thing, let's look at the rankings. And granted, these rankings are their rankings. So these aren't rankings that were given to them that they must abide by. Florida State was the number 4 team going into the final weekend. They were number 4. They were playing number 14, Louisville. Again, as determined by the committee, number 14. Texas was 7. And Texas was playing number 18, Oklahoma State. So Florida State wins a 10-point game against Louisville. Texas wins a, I believe, 28-point game against. And so in, I don't know whose world does number 7 jump ahead of number 4 after defeating number 18 when number 4 defeated number 14. That just doesn't make any sense. That, and also, and considering that Jordan Travis was lost 2 weeks prior. So they could have made that adjustment then. And then my final point would be, among many points, folks, you can dive yourself in on all sorts of videos over on the main channel concerning this topic. But the other one would be that, shoot, I lost it. My other point was, okay. They kept making this statement that this is a completely different team without Jordan Travis. They kept making that statement. Okay, that's fine. I get it. Then why are they ranked number 5 in the country? If they're a completely different team than the number 4 team in the country, they were number 4 with Jordan Travis. And now they're number 5, but they're a completely different team. Then why don't you have the guts to rank them where you believe they should be appropriately ranked? I don't know if that's 11 or 17 or 23 or wherever that is. It's obviously not number 5 because we just came through a college football season, and everybody forget what we just saw in the bowl games because we're going back a few weeks before we saw any of these playoffs or bowl games. Okay. We basically had a season where 8 teams were competing for the playoffs. You had Ohio State and Michigan. You had Alabama and Georgia. Florida State makes 5. Texas makes 6. Washington, Oregon, 7 and 8. Those were by far the teams that were coming down the stretch, were in position to make the playoffs. And there were all sorts of opinions over who should be 1 through 8 in what order, but those were the 8. Well, that means they're very close in their evaluation of those teams. They're very close. Well, if Florida State's the 4th best team in the country with Jordan Travis, and then you call them a significantly different team without him, then they're not number 5. They're 15, they're 16, they're somewhere else.
I think here's my counter to that. So think about it this way. I think that maybe we're trying to think too logically. And I think what they try to do is maybe keep Florida State there just because it's easier for them to keep Florida State there and potentially move them down than to move them down and then have them fight some of these teams that are above them to jump them. So I think leading up to kind of that final little, the final ranking to see who goes in the playoff, I think they almost follow the structure of the rankings, but I feel like almost as soon as that kind of ends and they're at that last little meeting to get these 4 teams, I almost feel like they just throw the rankings out, put the 4 best teams that they think, are going to be in there. And then they just kind of base it based on that. Because like you were saying, if you're trying to factor in rankings, it doesn't really make sense why this one would jump this one. The math doesn't add up if you look at it like that. But it almost seems to me like at that point, it's just the eye test, what they think are going to be the best matchups, because, there was no way it seemed that they even entertained the idea of putting Florida State in there, just how they talked about it. And so that's kind of my theory on is I think that they do follow the rankings up until that point, and they just kind of try to go wing it from there. And that's evident by the subjective nature of the playoff committee. And here was another one of my, theories was that, ESPN being the college football playoff, host TV wise, and potentially, losing that in the future, they're probably going to go to what each network has a playoff game and then rotate kind of like the Super Bowl does. But they're incentivized and this goes to other people's point, but we've always talked about the SEC getting a pass in these instances where there's two teams on the border of the playoff and they want to get the SEC teams in there. Well, where there's money, there's corruption, and these people who are part of this committee are humans that can take money and be corrupted by money. And if it's in ESPN's best interest, and they are the ones that have the host the playoff, who's to say they aren't funneling a little bit that direction to influence this? It's not outside the realm of possibility because, you can never overlook the fact of the power of money, especially in this situation where they are collapsing seemingly and they are desperate to get out of it. I don't know if you think that has a factor into it, but I think the network deals has a lot to do with some of this stuff.
So I'm not here to say that they do or they don't. I would not be surprised in learning in any such way that ESPN influences or actually makes the decision of the college football playoff teams.
Yep.
But again, I can go back to other years and give examples of when the best TV ratings team was not selected, that they bypassed Ohio State in particular, who's arguably the biggest TV draw in the nation, for somebody else.
I think I'm talking more so, and it's in their best interest to push the SEC teams right now. Yeah. Before, I'm sorry, I should have clarified the SEC teams right now, since they're getting that exclusive agreement with them, and it only helps their business.
Yes.
And at the sacrifice of other team. I think that's a lot to play into it that people don't really look at.
Yeah. They have an SEC network, for one thing. They have an SEC network that if they selected a playoff without an SEC team from the time of the conference championship games all the way through December and the first 10 or 12 days of January, their SEC network is completely useless and nobody cares and pays attention to it. And they've got no programming because they can't tout a playoff game.
Mm-hmm.
They're completely left out. So they're what used to be 90 some million homes. I don't know what it's down to, somewhere in the 70s. Again, besides college basketball, which doesn't come anywhere close to the interest that's generated this time of year, they've got nothing to go on. Yeah. They've got a dog in the fight.
Yeah. And so I think with all of these things at play, and I don't know why people expected anything otherwise, but again, I just think this was almost an out for the committee. The way these two games played out is almost like we got this right. And now it raises the question, would people have really wanted to see Florida State in there over being able to watch these two games? That was just kind of my thought after these games and how it affected the overall conversation. And I don't know just if it changed your mind at all. It seems like you're still kind of, and a lot of people I see are under the impression of it's right. It's the right thing to do to put him in. And I think that's kind of where the opinions aren't changing, is probably like your opinion, right? It's the right thing to do based on, what we've been, kind of shown before and what the criteria is supposed to be. If you don't earn it, then, if it's so subjective, then that really is kind of crappy for the teams that, aren't those big name teams coming in and just fall to bad luck at the end of the season, like losing your quarterback. And so, I wasn't sure if that changed your opinion at all, but it seems like yours is just, you think it's the right thing to do just as a college football fan, right?
Yeah, these kind of things don't tend to change my opinion because, again, to me, we have to go back to the point at which the decision was made, not the information that we have now.
Yep.
And did they select 4 good teams? Did they select 4 that earned it, that are worthy, that may be the 4 best teams in the country? Absolutely.
Yep.
Could Georgia have been there? If you're just selecting the 4 best teams in the country, could Georgia have been there?
Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. The 4 best teams, in my opinion, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and Texas.
There you go.
That's in my opinion.
Yeah. The very first year, they were weighing between Ohio State, TCU, and Baylor.
Yep.
And they selected Ohio State. Ohio State justified their decision. So on one hand, you could still have people that would look at the resume of TCU and or Baylor and say, we can't take what we saw in the playoffs because that's not when they made the decision. But I also understand the argument that what happens in the playoffs shows the quality of the decision.
Yep.
And that year, Ohio State backed up their decision by proving to be the best team.
Yep. No, that's a good point. And one thing, I'm sorry, just to touch on something Dion said in the comments. That's another thing where he says non-playoff games. I'll pull it up here. Non-playoff games are nothing but winter scrimmages. So that's another thing that we're, look going forward and bowl games in general. We use bowl games, I know, as a measuring stick, just kind of like, success is depending on, for some teams like us making a bowl game. It's like, when can Nebraska make a bowl game? That's how you track success or failures. How long has it been since they made a bowl game? Do you think that just with the amount of opt-outs and the way the transfer portal is early, and those players not playing, do you think the bowl games kind of, and my thing is, with the transfer portal stuff happening before the bowl games, and then the bowl games happening and not meaning as much, is it, it's almost like more beneficial? You think it's more beneficial, not I know, say not make a bowl game, but in the grand scheme of things, like it worked out for Nebraska this year, versus them making a bowl game? Maybe we don't have the time and effort to push and get Raiola, and stuff like that. So what's your take on that? Because that's a good point he pulled up.
Yeah, we don't know about the Raiola situation. I do know that there are playoff teams and bowl teams that are making similar pursuits of players and able to make recruiting pushes.
I think it's just a little harder to be able to kind of oversee that and put a full court press and have your staff, kind of rule staff was every day kind of
Sure.
there, flying the whole staff out and stuff like that. And I know the 14 extra practices, that stuff helps, but I'm just curious to know how far the value of those bowl games has fallen.
Well, I get your point, and your point makes total sense. There's only so much time in a day. But if you look at the teams if we took all the last 24-hour decisions that were made across America of all the top players that decided in the last 24 hours, most of them went to playoff teams or New Year's Six caliber teams.
Mm-hmm.
So those staffs still had the time to go out and pursue those players.
Yeah. No, yeah, they do. And I'm just wondering, just if the fact that, like, it is somebody like in specific, maybe I'm just looking more specifically at the Raiola situation, because they literally had to kind of put the full court press on and all of, and then getting Kyle McCord on campus. So maybe just in certain situations it works out, but in the grand scheme of things, of course, making a bowl game and having that extra, stuff that provides is still valuable. It's just a matter of the fact that it's kind of sad that the bowl games are almost devaluing in a way based on the transfer portal. I think the only other thing may be to, like, that I don't know if there's any way they can move the way the portal operates back. I don't think there's any way they can go about that. So it's one of those things that this is always going to be an issue, and it's going to get more of an issue as more people enter the portal. More of these players are going to be opting out.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it enough and probably don't have enough information to back up this suggestion. But if the portal opened today, one day after the playoffs and all the bowl games were concluded, everything except the national championship game, and classes start, schools enrolled, players are going back to practice for winter workouts and all of that at the beginning of school, that's roughly January 20th. For most schools, then there would be about a 3-week window if that was changed.
Yeah. So that would make it even more difficult. Yeah.
The other thing I would like to see happen is that these NIL deals included bowl games, meaning this is your NIL deal and it's contingent on you completing a college football season.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The thing is, are they allowed to incentivize like that? I would imagine, since there's no, like,
Probably
contracts. Yeah. So there's really nothing you can do about it at this point other than it's just the fact that like I think it's just as an old school college football fan and like how much pageantry and pride there used to be behind winning the bowl games, seeing that kind of dissipate, it's like,
Yeah, I hate it.
is it set up to get worse? It seems like it is.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's it's getting worse. The only thing I saw in a positive vein this year is that it seemed like the number of opt-outs was not necessarily lessened, but it seems to have hit a threshold that this is about what it's gonna be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and it used to be just those were all NFL draft decisions, and now it's NFL draft decisions plus all the portal decisions.
Yep.
And then it's funny to see with some of these teams, there are some players, depending on how they market themselves and see themselves as a commodity, where
Mhm.
they actually play in the bowl games.
Yep.
If there's a decision made by player determining, I would like to put this game on tape and make this an audition for my next school, and the coach thinking, hey, yeah, we could still use you. I want to win a game. So some of them still play, which is kind
Yep.
of interesting that they're playing their last game knowing that they're leaving.